Welcome to a new episode of Mic'd Up With Mars, our monthly podcast series on all things mobile UA. Now, Albert Einstein famously said that everything that can be counted does not necessarily count, and everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. And who better to know that than modern day app marketers? App measurement and attribution are crucial cornerstones of app marketing. And today we have with us one of the leaders in mobile attribution space. Welcome Sanjay Trisal to our podcast. Sanjay is the General Manager of India SE and ANZ at AppsFlyer.
Thank you. Thanks, Diksha, for having me here.
Pleasure to have you. And he's joined today in a conversation with Ankit Travel, Director of Business Development and Partnership at Affle's Mars. Welcome, Ankit, and over to you.
Thanks, Diksha. Thanks, and looking forward for another episode for Mic'd Up With Mars. And Sanjay, welcome. You and I have been also known each other for almost 6-7 years now. But it'd be great if you can tell a little bit more about your organization, AppsFlyer, your background, and the work you do at AppsFlyer.
Fantastic. Well, firstly, thanks a lot, Ankit, for having me here. It's great to share the stage. AppsFlyer, as you would know, it's a mobile measurement platform, B2B SaaS, big data marketing cloud for marketers to check, evaluate, track, and measure their ROIs, to be kind of put in very simple terms. Our headquarters based out of Israel, and we have offices across 19 locations, pretty much covering every nook and corner of the world. Been operational in India from last about 5.5-6 years, as I was the employee number one for India, and been growing at a very, very decent pace and growing the business and making attribution as a core component for the marketing tech stack for advertisers in India.
Great. Cool. I think let's address the elephant in the room. And I'm sure you must have spoken several times about it. But Sanjay, everybody is talking about the Apple iOS changes. It's been almost 14.5 days that it has been rolled out. And every player in this ecosystem is talking about opt-in rates and device ID sharing. And I think the vantage point where you sit, you already see a lot of this hysteria. But do you see any sense prevailing? Do you see some method in the madness coming as iOS 14 gets rolled out across markets?
Well, Ankit, if you look, mobile ecosystem, it's in the midst of ever-shifting landscape. You would know it more than anyone else that over the past 2 decades, mobile has evolved drastically. Whether it is COPA compliances, CUID, GDPR, so on and so forth. And in last 2 to 3 years, we have witnessed the pace of change accelerating really. Most notable is a measured increase of change around privacy, the way data is being shared and consumed. Now, despite these changes, mobile is booming. I mean, if you were to ask me, we have seen multiple times in this time frame over last 2 decades when people thought, oh, it's kind of getting very challenging, done and dusted, what is going to happen in future? But we have seen mobile always booming, and I can give you some stats a little later. But iOS 14 is no different. Is it another change that we are going through? Well, yes. Is it something that we need to kind of look out for? Are things changing? The answer is absolutely yes. What we need to do is we for sure would overcome the challenges that it brings. We just need to carefully adapt it.
No, absolutely. I think, as I read somewhere recently, that change is inevitable, progress is optional. And as you rightly said, that one needs to delicately navigate this. And this is not the first time you've seen these changes, right? Every time there's an upheaval, whether it was GDPR or COPA in the past, we have figured out a way. So I'm sure you'll also survive this in the coming few days and weeks and months. But curious, like in India, because iOS share is still very small vis-a-vis Android, have you seen some trends or signals that advertisers are trying to double down on Android vis-a-vis iOS, or they are just in the wait and watch mode?
Well, in India, predominantly is a Android-heavy market. I would say more than 96% is Android. About 4.5, at max 5% is iOS. What we need to see is we just need to kind of understand it a little better. So there are two sides to the iOS 14 coin. On one side is a private future for consumers with increased privacy and transparency for their data, right? But on the other side, a very complicated future for advertisers with massive challenges and limitations to mobile measurement and targeted advertisement. Now, as we have seen in the past, the trends towards privacy usually correlates with advancement in data complexity. If you look at iOS 14 now today, let's look at some of the basic stats. Like for example, the user adoption rate. The user adoption rate, and this is this is basis the AppsFlyer data, and you know that AppsFlyer have kind of implemented ATT, for example. We have 1310 apps that have implemented, and about 64 million users have seen the ATT prompt so far. 17% so far have implemented ATT. Okay, this is the global number. While the number looks less, but the peak and the mass adoption, I believe personally, about 85-90% market share in the enterprise space in India, and a very very large reasonable market share globally. But if you look at the AppsFlyer data, the iOS 14.5 adoption rate globally is 14%, and in India it's about 22%. Okay, if I were to kind of look at the data of the number of apps that is nearing, we'll see it anytime soon. Now you ask this very important question of opt-in. Again, if I go to the AppsFlyer data, you see the opt-in rates on the advertiser side is about 35 to 40% so far, right? Personally, I didn't think initially that the opt-in rate is going to be higher. Well, of course,
quite high. True.
Yeah. So
40% is like wow.
So far it is, yeah. So far it's at that rate. Now there are ways, and so there's a mandatory prompt that comes in, but there are ways and means that people are working out smartly to kind of make sure that users opt in. Firstly, if you create the confidence in users' mind that his or her data is going to be used for better user experience, and therefore the person needs to opt in, and you have a great onboarding experience for the user, and you create some amount of loyalty before you show this prompt, the probability is that the chances for opt-in is far higher. While the ultra numbers of the overall 14.5 adoption is lesser, but 35% is still a good number. If I were to break it down, let's say I won't get into each vertical, but gaming that comes to my mind right now. Games or the core games are faster to implement ATT. About 15 to 16% implementation has been for casual to hyper casual games. But when you look at hardcore and mid-core games, the same adoption is about 25 to 28%. And India overall is about 41%. So there's a mix. To answer your question, there's a mix of how much iOS 14 adoption has happened so far, what is the ATT prompts happening, and what is the opt-in rate. While it's still early days, I think Apple itself is not pushing too hard on it, because they also want to see the data unfold, and they want to kind of evaluate and see how it is it's panning out. But so far, I think it looks okay to me.
No, I think absolutely. I think when the first time the ATT and the new changes were coming, people were talking about an upheaval. That doesn't seem to be, and with the protracted adoption and rollout from Apple, I think things are not going to be as bad as it seemed, which is great. And just the last piece on that. So curious, how are you preparing for this as an organization? And I know I've been following a lot of interesting posts and reports from you on this for the last 6 to 9 months. But curious, how is AppsFlyer looking forward to adopt this change?
Okay, so first of all, everybody in this ecosystem is going to get affected, as I said, whether it is the advertiser on one side, or the network, or the publisher on the other side, or the attribution platform. So fundamentally, three things get impacted if we look at from an attribution standpoint. One, the attribution is fundamentally going to change. It's all going to be on aggregated basis. First party audience segmentation and data will be limited, and the deferred deep linking will be limited to some extent. Okay, there are many things that need to be considered or reconsidered when it comes to iOS 14.5, whether it's from the way the brand's PI architecture is designed, or how the data is gathered and applied, whether it's aggregated or user level, to how they strategize around user acquisition. Okay, even the product, in the way the product is designed. So all of this has to be reconsidered. And there are fundamentally, as I said, three key interventions that happen. As I said, attribution fundamentally changes from marketers to partners to MMPs. The entire industry's thinking around attribution will have to change to adopt more privacy-centric. which is basically the aggregated. Audience creation and remarketing will be limited to those opting in for tracking, right? Now, presuming this number is going to be low, the ability to create a lookalike is challenging and limited. So remarketing has to be really and carefully thought of and whether it's in terms of, since there's no IDFA, passing on the hashed IDs, the hashed, I don't know, email IDs, hashed phone numbers, or hashed IDFE, which is like identifier for vendors, and building up audiences on that. So you asked this question about how is AppsFlyer predominantly and precisely kind of tackling this. I think the best way to put it is that AppsFlyer is the only MMP to provide unified attribution for the age of privacy. We are tackling this across multiple angles, providing privacy-centric attribution along the first SKAd network or scan-ready SDK. So fundamentally what we have done to overcome the iOS 14 challenge, we have a product named SK360. I'm not sure if you already heard about that or not. So what does SK360 do? Now, SK360, it's a suite of products, a solution with a suite of products, 5 products or more, which will help a marketer to run the marketing more effectively, to optimize the ROI using the new conversion algorithm, and have a better fraud-proof environment and analyze the results. Not only that, we've gone a step ahead and created something called Predict as a feature, which helps you not only to evaluate and monitor the services that are and the results that you're getting today, but also predict how your results are going to look in future. So I would say privacy, by the way, has not been new to us. At AppsFlyer, we've been working on it for a long time. And the combination of advanced aggregated privacy, which is a solution on the aggregated basis on the probabilistic modeling, clubbed with the SKAd network more deterministic attribution, can help advertisers overcome to a larger extent this challenge. That being said, listen, I think we are all in this innovative phase. We would want to be ahead of innovation. We want to be the first to innovate every time on time in this, and I'm sure we're going to learn as we move forward on this.
No, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, and some of the developments you mentioned, I can tell you from the vantage point where I sit, you're definitely ahead than some of the other players in this ecosystem. So that's great. Cool. So let us change tracks, and something you mentioned also resonated a lot with us, because here at Mass we are also trying to unify how marketers get insights, and we've launched a unified audience platform. And you mentioned that, and from what I've also read, that AppsFlyer has something called people-based attribution solution, where you're trying to break the silos between web and app. So can you share a little bit about that, and how does this fits in the new scheme of things on iOS 14 and beyond?
Okay, I think a great question, Ankit. Well, I think first of all, breaking silos, it's very important. Data is coming from multiple sources, multiple platforms, multiple devices, multiple channels, and you can't be looking at them in isolation, because guess what? You might either run a threat of duplication or false measurement. So our guiding star has always been and will always be the advertiser's needs and breaking down silos into critical business challenges. And that's what we help our customers overcome. Now, as I said, data comes from everywhere, as we all know. And we have always taken pride in us being the source of most immaculate, clean, and accurate data insights possible. And for this principle, we empower brands to take the holistic view of every user journey across platforms, channels, and devices. Now, you spoke about iOS 14 era. So, for example, in our SK360, we combine multiple solutions together for maximized coverage. And this is in an environment which has limited data, right? And we are taking care of the user privacy as an utmost importance there. So under the iOS 14 era with SK360, we're just trying to build this, or we have built a system where we will take into consideration these data coming from different silos and combining them into one. On a personal thought, I think I was other day having a chat with somebody. I personally believe that there isn't anything called as organic data, or there shouldn't be anything called as organic data. Why? Sounds very weird, right?
Yep.
So you don't wake up from your bed thinking I have to download XYZ app today. Does it ever happen? No.
No.
Every day, whenever you do or whenever you download an app, there is a nudge, there is an incentive, there is an influence, there is something that has influenced your brain to do that. So other day I was having a chat with one of my CMO friends, and he said, "Hey, you know what? My organic data looks less, and everything looks to be in the non-organic data." I said, "Well, that can be a great news. You are possibly measuring everything." There's personally, to me, I don't think there is anything which can be bucketed as true organic. True organic to me means getting up and downloading something out of nowhere. So I think everything that we do has an influence, and as marketers, we should have tools, mechanisms to track that. And the better you do your job in measuring all the sources that bring a particular user to you, the more control you have in data. What you cannot measure is what you cannot control. So that is why, to me personally, I believe it's very important to break these silos. Yes, of course, there are various products that are available there, but to break these silos and have a unified view of the data, very, very important. So to answer your question, I'm sorry, I'm just going a little long on this. If having unified
that's
platform
fine.
means, if having unified platform means having the most accurate, holistic view of campaigns, data insights for greater ROI, then yes, it is a core focus for us. And I know it's a core focus for you for a long time and doing a great job with it. So I think breaking of silos, very, very important. Measuring everything end to end, very, very important.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned anything which cannot be measured, cannot be controlled. In fact, we believe here that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So it all starts with the right measurement. But one of the other things you mentioned which also resonated was around attribution, right? Because till now, the whole app marketing industry is built on last click attribution. And now, thanks to the efforts which you guys are doing, people are talking about multi-touch attribution, maybe first click, you touch, whatever. But at least those conversations are happening. So any insights or learnings of how do you see the whole attribution industry, which for the longest time has been just hitched on last click? You're going to see this changing in the next few months or maybe years to come.
I think it's not right to say that only last click probably would have made an everlasting impact on a user to kind of download the app. So while the model universally accepted in the marketplace today is a last click attribution, and AppsFlyer does that. But what we do on top of that, as you mentioned, is a multi-touch attribution. What happens in a life cycle of a user who eventually becomes your user after the app download? There are multiple touch points that a user is exposed to. And depending on the day, time of the day, the mood, behavior, environment, whatever that user is exposed to at that point in time, he or she may or may not necessarily complete the whole action, which means clicking the ad, going to the store, redirecting to the app, downloading the app, and then opening the app. So it may vary at any point in time. So it's very important, I think, for a company which believes in end-to-end measurement and attribution. It was very important for us to give a holistic view to the advertiser of where the user has come, the entire life cycle and the journey of the user. That's why we have put the multi-touch attribution in place, which tells you how many touch points before the user came to your app necessarily had. So what the advertiser can do is retune and rethink the digital marketing strategy and optimize the campaigns basis that. So you may on one side look at, hey, you know what, I've been spending money on XYZ source and I'm not getting any installs from there versus I'm getting all the installs from ABC. But guess what? When you look at multi-touch attribution, you know that, okay, XYZ has been instrumental in influencing the decision and has been assisted in a touch. So I think this is going to stay. To answer your question that whether attribution can be provided to multiple sources, I think that's half dependent on the advertisers. Today, there are tools available for the advertiser or the developer to know where the user has come from and how many touch points it has. Now, whether the developer or the advertiser wants to give a flat touch, flat attribution across each touch points, or a U shape or an N shape or whatever, I think that's the call that they would want to take. And our job, I think, as attribution providers, is to make sure that we give the entire life cycle journey of the user to the advertiser.
Absolutely. I think so. Cool. So let's change tracks a little bit. Let's zoom out and really talk about where we are, right? Like in India, and all of us have gone through a very last 6 weeks as a very difficult phase vis-a-vis the pandemic. But what really pandemic has also done from a business lens, right, is accelerated digitization, right? So there's this famous quote from Lenin which says there are decades when nothing happened, and then there are weeks when decade happened. And that really has happened in the last, I'll say, maybe 12 months or more, where so much businesses have accelerated. And today everything is becoming like an app on your phone. It probably started with gaming few years ago, then it moved to shopping, and today there's an app for everything, right? So I think, again, from the vantage point where you track so many different apps across verticals in India, any interesting anecdotes or insights of what has happened which really accelerated and which really made you say, wow, I never expected that. That is one part of it. And the other is also consumer behavior. So any interesting insights which has created certain consumer behaviors which you think will stick even after when the pandemic is over?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think you said a quote which reminds me of, I think Winston Churchill said it once: "Never let good crisis go waste." Right. So I think that's what most advertisers showed or the developers showed their resilient nature in this pandemic. And I think the whole pandemic over last 1.5 years that we've been seeing, close little more than a year, clubbed with the India-China political geoclimate that kind of emerged in India, gave, of course, as you rightly said, rise to a lot of apps for every use, which is great. This pandemic and the other environmental factors created new space. We were able to identify a certain user behavior, demands grew, new demands came in, and the marketer's approach to this whole ecosystem and its expectation and needs changed. And they kind of were, I would say, very much resilient and ready to cater to the needs of the users. I think in general, as users, by and large, I would say we have learned to some extent to live in this pandemic. I mean, as consumers and users. Of course, the broader challenges like healthcare and things like that, they remain. But if I were to kind of pinpoint on the digital marketing, that kind of an ecosystem, I think the consumers are getting better in managing their needs, if I may say that, and expectations are much clearer. So I, as a consumer today, know that I need to have an access to, let's say, a health and fitness app, a grocery app, and things like that. And similarly, the needs of each users are getting far more defined and crystal clear. So what's happening is that developers and advertisers are catering to those needs, sometimes holistically, sometimes in very nuanced and niche areas. The clear trends that I can see from an attribution standpoint as AppsFlyer, we saw a huge growth in edtech. Okay, so I know there has been a lot of organic growth. Again, I'm saying organic, but I mean not necessarily what developer was necessarily measuring or incentivizing for. But a lot of emphasis was done by developers in putting money in making adoption a little more clear, and this was done across platforms on edtech. The other thing that completely stood out, which I was very skeptical, to be very honest, very skeptical for a long time, was gaming. I thought India as a gaming market it's not in our DNA, it's not in our culture necessarily to kind of pay to advance to next levels, pay to buy coins and stuff like that. But I think that changed by far. I think gaming, we saw a huge emergence, and a lot of apps got developed out of India. The other piece, which was a very, very strong growth, was the short video apps. I know earlier we were dominated by some other apps, but once they went off, we've seen a bunch of apps that came in. I think while they are more focused on building a short video content, which is necessarily focused on entertainment, But I think this is going to give, in my personal opinion, again, it will lead to a lot of infotainment, if I may say so, and more focused on information. People will use these as tools to spread awareness, information, asking for help, and things like that. Other than that, I would say hyperlocal is of course that companies are putting a lot more focus on how to kind of address the hyperlocal needs. Outside of the tech side, I think the hybrid remote work model is going to stay for a long time post the pandemic as well, because people have learned to work remotely as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, as you rightly said, categories like gaming, entertainment, hyperlocal. In fact, the personal anecdote I'll share is that my grandmother and mother now started ordering groceries on a grocery app. And despite working in this system for 10 years and like really promoting apps, I could never convince them to start buying grocery. And that's where what I could not do in a decade, pandemic did it in few weeks. So
Absolutely, yeah. Same with my parents. Their exposure to the app world was only WhatsApp. Absolutely nothing else beyond that. But they are on medication, and a very regular medication, and they are using the medicines apps, pharmacy apps.
exactly. Cool. So I know you're a busy person, Sanjay, but before we let you go, a couple of more things. I also know now that you're managing not just India, but Southeast Asia and ANZ. So any compare and contrast between India versus some of these markets? How do you see app trends, app economy shaping up in, say, in Indonesia versus India, or say Singapore versus Australia?
Well, early for me to comment in the larger scheme of things, but I think if you look at India and Southeast Asia as a region, I think pretty much nuanced in the same landscape, mindset, expectation, pricing. Now the scale that we, for example, look at Indonesia is amazing. Or for example, if you look at Vietnam, amazing games coming out of that market. Great gaming market we see. We know that Australia, New Zealand has always been a very, very heavy brands market. But the adoption of apps around health tech, fitness, fashion, lifestyle, huge adoption happening on those spaces. E-commerce is doing very well. We have the name culprits I don't want to name, for example, some of the leading apps in Singapore, and they're doing very well, whether it's e-commerce or travel. For example, across Southeast Asia, there we have a couple of companies which are doing really, really very well. I think there isn't much to kind of, I would say, choose from A versus B, but what I definitely want to say, one of the most dynamic, booming and high growth markets, I would say India, Southeast Asia. Of course, Australia predominantly has been heavy on brands, but we're seeing a huge emergence of performance market out there. There's this question always people asking me, in personal space or in professional space, well, have we reached the peak? Have we reached the peak? Is this the max that we have seen? I mean, just do the maths. If you look at, if I were to talk about India, for example, at about 29-30% smartphone penetration at 1.4 billion people, there is so much more headroom
Just
to grow.
scratching the surface, absolutely.
There's so much more headroom. And guess what? The growth is going to come from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. And I keep saying this, the first exposure to internet is not a laptop or a desktop or a computer, it's a smartphone. And the mobile literacy, doesn't matter what ethnic background, literacy in terms of education and English literacy one has. Somehow in India, mobile literacy is always there. Like for example, a kid in India, you don't have to teach them to play cricket. They will always know it automatically, right? So
you have a son, I have a daughter, we know Sanjay. They sometimes tell us, oh, this is how you access this app, this is the setting you have to do.
So
absolutely.
The mobile literacy is very, very high, and therefore the growth is very high. And that's what I see across these markets.
Got it. Cool. Before we close, a few rapid fire questions for you, Sanjay. So first question, what makes you remain growth focused?
Well, I don't necessarily chase for the goals. In fact, I would suggest keep a moving goalpost. I don't know how many of us know of Sergei Bubka, if I'm getting the name right. He was a famous pole vaulter from Russia.
Yes.
Raising the bar. Like he would always cross the bar. Next time, raise the bar and cross it. Raise the bar and cross it. Well, personally, I enjoy the journey more than the destination. I think the ups and downs, the challenges and the learnings that you get while you are on that journey are more rewarding than the satisfaction you get in achieving the goal. Well, yes, of course, there's a satisfaction in achieving the goal, but for me, the journey is more rewarding. That keeps possibly me growth focused. I don't know if that's how I can.
Interesting. No, enjoy the journey, not the destination, and the destination
Yeah.
keeps changing.
Yes.
True. And curious, any quote do you live by? For?
Oh yes, 100%. So I keep saying this to everybody and my team. You have your own bunch of shares of success and failure. So the quote I live by and I tell people is never take success to your head and never take failure to your heart.
So true in today's world. I think copability and able to cope with new circumstances is much more important than capability, right? Because the skill sets we learn will become obsolete in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So absolutely, I think. And any daily habit which you found has been game changer and could be very relevant for some of our audiences who are listening you?
Daily habit. I think small things. For example, what I've started doing in last 1 year during this pandemic, and I'm just completely focused on it is. I ask myself on everything that I do, will it matter? Will it matter in the larger scheme of things, let's say in a day, in a week, in a month, for a larger team? And once the answer is yes or no, accordingly, I pick up the things and the projects that I have to do. And I call it and I make it something I call MIT's most important task. This helps me stay focused on these tasks that I need to do proactively. Like, as you know, in the day, you get sucked up into a lot of things reactively. There are things that need your attention and things like that, but there are things that you need to achieve in the larger scheme of things. So this MIT helps me stay focused on the things that I need to achieve proactively.
Got it. Define Sanjay Trisal in one word.
One word. Well, I'm a simple man, I guess, with simple needs and simple thoughts. I would want to be remembered as somebody as resilient. That's how I would want to define myself. I would want people to define me as resilient. I think that's the better way.
And I have been fortunate enough to work with you shoulder to shoulder for a few years. So Sanjay, I can definitely vouch for that. The resilience you have shown time and again is obviously inspiring for me personally and people who have known you for quite long. So that's absolutely hitting the nail on the head. Lastly, any parting thoughts you want to give to our listeners?
Well, two, if I may have a permission. One,
Sure.
The mobile marketing is going to evolve, whether it's iOS 14.5 today, whether it is GDPR a few years back, or whether it's something else in future. This is what we need to know and remember. Mobile as a device is something which is very close to a user's hand. You can reach to a user in the most preferred time slots. This is something which is ultimately measurable, quantifiable, and controllable. So this is going to evolve. I have no doubts in my mind that the market and mobile ecosystem is going to boom. So that's point number one. Secondly, on a personal basis, I think pandemic is not what is going to stay here forever. Like it's a tough time. We just need to be strong, face it, be sensible, stay sane, take care of ourselves, take care of our family, loved ones and close ones, and do everything that is required to stay safe and keep others safe. I would say that I think pandemic is a great leveler and a wake-up call for us. Nature has its own way of kicking back. So we need to take care of nature and nature will take care of us. Yeah, that's what I would want to say. I don't know if it sounds philosophical, but that's what I wanted to say as a parting thought.
No, I think you have summed it well to what we started with, that not everything that can be counted counts. Not everything that counts can be counted. So true, Sanjay. We came back from where we started. It was really lovely chatting with you, share notes about mobile ecosystem, some of the trends we are seeing in India and globally, to how we have to really lead a very humble and resilient life. So it was really great talking to you, Sanjay. Hope we can invite you soon again on one of these episodes. Thank you,
Ankit. Thanks a lot for having me here, and thanks to the entire team for hosting me. I think you guys doing a great job with this series of Mic'd Up podcast. It's really good. It's really informative. I've seen some of your podcasts before, heard podcasts before, and I think as a company you're doing a great job. So keep the good work up. All the best and kudos to your team.
Thanks, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay and Ankit. I hope our listeners also enjoyed listening to this episode and that you take back some valuable information and apply it to your app success journey. If you're interested in learning more about mobile UN and attribution, follow AppsFlyer and Mass on social media. Until next time, thank you.